Shedeur Sanders, the son of jackass head coach Deion Sanders, was originally projected in last week's NFL draft to be a top 5, worst case scenario, top 10 pick in the first round. Well, the first round is held on a Thursday. The first round came and went. Then the second and third rounds are held on a Friday. So the first round came and went Thursday. Shedeur was not drafted. And everyone was like, okay, he slipped a little bit. And there were some rumblings about him being a little cocky in team interviews. There were some breakdowns of his stats. He didn't really face the best defenses when he was in college at Colorado in the Big 12. So there were some concerns there. And it was like, okay, well, regardless, maybe we overrated him in the first round, but he's got to be at least a second round talent, right? So the second round comes and goes, no Shedeur. The third round comes and goes, no Shedeur. And in fact, at this point, you've got quarterbacks who are projected to go way lower than him in the 5th round getting drafted above him. And everyone's like, what's going on? So by the end of day 2, it's pandemonium. Mel Kiper, the draft analyst, who I don't think has ever gotten a pick right in his entire life, is having a full-blown meltdown on ESPN, calling it disgusting. Stephen A. Smith is on Twitter implying collusion. It just goes on and on and on. People are spazzing out. And then the 5th round rolls around and Shedeur finally gets drafted. Now, this has, of course, turned into a race thing, because why would it not? Well, however, what these race pimps won't tell you, these people grifting off racial issues in America. By the way, you notice the Carmelo Anthony camp has been rather quiet in that stabbing. Interesting. Well, what these race pimps won't tell you is that the first pick of the draft, the first overall pick, was a black guy. It was a black guy. Oh, yeah. It was a black guy. It wasn't just a black guy. It was a black quarterback. So the racism allegations go right out the window. There's a guy named Cameron Ward from Miami who's very talented. But that's not enough for the race pimps. They have to continue to fan these flames. They got to find a way. The grift can never stop with people that pimp, or with people that grift off of racial issues in this country. And that goes for both ways. The grift can never stop. You have to keep the grift alive. There's always some grand conspiracy at play by the other side to, quote unquote, keep you down. And what the race pimps settled on was that Cameron Ward was guilty of something called code switching. Now, code switching is where a black guy will not act, quote unquote, black, whatever that means, to impress wealthy white people in the business world. Or have you guys ever considered that maybe that's just how Cam Ward acts? Like, do you understand how? I guess they didn't outright accuse Cam Ward of code switching. They said Shedeur refused to code switch, which implied that Cam Ward was. Now, Cam Ward's a very talented quarterback. I hope he does great things at Tennessee, other than when he plays my Patriots or when we're competing for a playoff spot with his team, whatever. I just feel horrible for him because no one's talking about him. Everyone's talking about a quarterback that got drafted in the 5th round. You had this guy he's a phenomenal talent, had a career year, and all anyone wants to talk about is Shedeur Sanders getting drafted in the 5th round. Now, there's a couple of reasons here. You can go back after the Nebraska game. They asked Shedeur Sanders about his poor play when we whooped their ass that game, by the way. And he turns around to the reporters and goes, how many times did Raiola get hit? Raiola was Nebraska's quarterback, for those of you that are losers, gays that don't watch football. He said, how many times did Raiola get hit? He threw his offensive line under the bus in press conferences. That wasn't the first time he's done that, and it wouldn't be the last time. He would flash a big flashy watch in front of the camera every time they won, taunt opposing players, get into shouting matches and altercations with the other team's ball boys. He was a jackass. So it was no surprise when we heard that Shedeur's interviews with teams weren't quite going the way they thought they were. That he kind of came off as a cocky, spoiled little prick, and that's what he is. He's a Nepo baby. Daddy's a multimillionaire NFL superstar, Deion Sanders. Daddy becomes your head coach everywhere you go. You never have to compete for your job. In fact, when Deion Sanders took over at Colorado, the first thing he said in the press conference was, "This is my son, that's your quarterback." End of discussion. Okay. I guess everybody else in the quarterback room might as well just leave now. He's a Nepo baby. He's been handed everything his entire life. That's a fact. So maybe that's got something to do with it. Maybe they didn't want to deal with his helicopter dad that would be trying to run the show for a talent that was, yes, while Shedeur's a decent quarterback, he's not generational. Maybe it was the fact that he said things like this in the NFL Combine.
If you ain't trying to change the franchise or the culture, don't give me. So you should know history repeats itself over and over and over, and I've done it over and over and over, so it should be no question why an NFL franchise should pick me. You think I'm worried about what critics say or what people got to say? You know who my dad is? They hated on him too. So it's like it's almost normal. Without people hating, it's not normal for us. So we like the adversity. We like everything that comes with the name. That's why we are who we are.
Man, how long was the bus that took that guy to school in the mornings? I'm sorry. Sounds like a moron. Let me ask you guys a question. How many times have you ever had a positive experience with someone who said the words, "Do you know who my dad is?" Because I've heard those words a couple of times, and it's a big fat zero. I've never once interacted with someone who went, "Do you know who my dad is?" Male or female, black or white, Christian or Jew, straight or gay, and walked away from that interaction going, "Yeah, that was a positive experience. I could use some more of that guy." When you go in and you tell NFL teams, coaches that have been trying to establish a culture for years, that they better be ready to adapt their culture to you, a guy who's got a 500 record in D1 football, a guy who who takes unnecessary sacks because he's trying to pad his stats with passing yards, a guy who throws his offensive lineman under the bus every time he gets his ass handed to him, a guy who has unnecessary confrontations with equipment managers and showboats every time he scores and shows his ass, not literally, figuratively. You're going to tell those guys that they need to adjust their culture to you? What do you think they're going to say? The NFL is a business just like anything else. I don't care if you're running a professional football team or an O'Reilly Auto Parts store. You have to weigh talent versus baggage. Now, baggage doesn't always mean the guy's a criminal or a wife beater or anything like that. It may just mean he's a locker room cancer and a jerk off. Now, there are guys out there that are cancers to the locker room, like Antonio Brown was with the Steelers, that you put up with. Randy Moss would be another example. You put up with them because the talent's there, and it just outweighs, at least to a certain point it does. Eventually it gets, all those guys erode eventually and just totally unravel. But the baggage the baggage doesn't outweigh the talent. That was the thing with Kaepernick. There was no, I understand they reached a settlement. In my opinion, it didn't look like collusion to me against Kaepernick. Kaepernick wasn't a bad quarterback. He was better than a lot of backups in the NFL. But the baggage and media circus that came with Colin Kaepernick was not worth the quality of player you got in Colin Kaepernick. Another example of that would be Tim Tebow. There's a problem when you have a backup quarterback in the end, and it's nothing. Tebow's a great guy, right? The talent just wasn't there as an NFL passer. Okay? So there's a problem, though, when there's a media circus around your backup quarterback. NFL teams didn't collude against Shedeur Sanders any more than they did against Tim Tebow. They came to individual decisions, in my opinion, and said, yeah, Probably better than, the second or third team guy we have on the team. Not worth the shit show that's going to come with him. And that's life. I've worked sales jobs where we had the guy who was the top salesman at the company 1 month, was fired the next month. Paid the company egregious amounts of money, but tore down team morale because he was a jackass that nobody wanted to be around. That was a long time ago. But still, that jackass was me. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. But I've worked with, we've all worked with people like that. It's just like running an office. You draft a clown, you get a circus. And teams didn't want to put up with the circus. They're also just done overvaluing quarterbacks. And we're getting sports inside baseball here. It's fine though, right? I grew up watching football in the 2000s, and I remember late 2000s, early 2010s, you started to see this trend where teams would reach on quarterbacks. And they would reach on quarterbacks because they were pressured by ownership and the fans to do something because they had a subpar quarterback. They needed to get over the hump, so they rolled the dice on a guy who probably wasn't a first-round talent. Guys like Paxton Lynch, guys like E.J. Manuel, guys like Tim Tebow, Brandon Weeden. I could go on and on and on and on, listing quarterbacks off in the 2010s that were taken in the first round that had absolutely no business going in the first round. But teams took them anyway. And do you know what happened? GMs and coaches got fired. Franchises got set back tens of millions of dollars in 4 or 5 years at a time. Because drafting a quarterback in the first round, that's a 3 to 5 year commitment, substantial amount of salary cap. What happened is teams have just learned. Everybody except the Cleveland Browns, who did this with Johnny Manziel and didn't learn from that circus, then did it again with Deshaun Watson and still didn't learn from that circus. But the other 31 teams have figured it out. We're not going to draft a quarterback. We're not going to overvalue a quarterback who's a 4th round talent and take him in the 1st round just because we need a quarterback. We'll draft an edge rusher. We'll look in free agency, see if there's a guy there next year. If there's not, then we'll evaluate the quarterbacks in that draft. But we're done overvaluing quarterbacks. You can get fairly far in today's NFL, at least far enough for a coach to keep his job, with an average game manager quarterback. A lot of people thought it was going the other direction. It's not the case. You don't need the elite quarterback to make the playoffs. We saw the Minnesota Vikings. Living testimony to that. Sam Darnold, are you kidding me? You don't need a stud quarterback to keep your job as a coach. You can get a guy that'll manage the game and right the ship and keep your head above water long enough for you to find your guy. Teams are done gambling on people that are high risk, high reward like that in the first round. And I don't blame them. But it's not a race issue. Shedeur Sanders is a jackass. His dad is a jackass. The two of them are a package deal. And the bonus to that package deal is the shit show that they bring everywhere they go. And NFL teams don't want that. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, be sure to click the link in the description to get the full episode on Rumble. If you prefer to listen along, you could actually get us on Spotify, Spreaker, and iHeartRadio. You can also go to www.outlawstreamers.com to learn more about not just my show, but tons of other great shows and all the exciting projects they have coming up. Follow my socials at Caleb Isn't Funny on Twitter and Instagram, at Caleb Salvatore Comedy on the Chinese Spy app that is TikTok, and be sure to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thanks, and we'll see you every Saturday for brand new episodes of That's Based. Peace.